What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. In today's episode, Victor and Kim dig even deeper on the breaking money silence theme introduced in episode 2. Using Kathleen Burns Kingsbury's book as a guide, they discuss how you break the silence with your spouse or significant other, and the specific areas you may want to address together. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
I have a feeling today's discussion is going to be a little emotional.
Are you worried?
No, I'm not worried at all because I think you and I are actually really good at this. So before we get into it, so if that was a primer, right, you're in for quite a show today. I actually wanted to start by saying I hope everybody enjoyed episode 2. You got a taste of what we're hoping to deliver with the podcast and providing some information. I know that the topic, which is breaking money silence, based on Kathleen Burns Kingsbury's book, was kind of more on the emotional side than it is about financial topics, learning about financial products or concepts, right? But it gets to the core of a really strong foundation about how people talk about money.
That's right. And I promise I'll be gentle today. I have my money talk guidelines in front of me, and I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to listen actively.
Ooh, I like it.
I'm going to use I statements. See, I'm already using them. Mm-hmm. And I am going to practice a lot of curiosity and agree to disagree.
And that's just from the top of your head, all of those things, right?
Exactly.
Right. It's not like you were reading it off of anything.
No, not at all. And when we're done, we're going to celebrate.
I love it. And the celebration is probably going to be my favorite part. Speaking of celebrations, I wanted to first say, thank you for everybody who listened to episode 2. Thank you to everybody who's been providing so much feedback. And Kim, we had our first listeners from Mexico.
All right.
Yes. Yeah. So bienvenidos y saludos. So welcome and hello to those listening in Mexico. And for that one person who's listening in Kenya, Jambo. That's how you say hello in Nairobi. They actually say hello, but they also say Jambo.
I like Jambo.
Oh, Jambo sounds like a lot more fun, right?
Yeah, it does.
So today we're going to go a lot deeper on the concepts that we introduced in episode number 2 based on the book Breaking Money Silence by focusing on how do you break money silence when it comes to talking to your spouse or significant other. And I want to say right off the bat here that we're really talking about couples, right? Romantic couples. So it could be a significant other. It could be your spouse. It could be someone that you're living with. But the idea is that it's a committed couple that is actually either sharing finances or that they're pretty much entangled in their finances in one way or the other.
That's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's just say partner.
Okay, I like this. You're my partner.
I am.
So we're married, but you're my partner. And so from here on out, we're just going to say partner, and it means all of those things. It means spouse, significant other, someone who you're in a committed romantic relationship with. So obviously one of the things that, just to recap on episode 2, the introduction of the concept was to identify those money scripts, right? So the individual money scripts, the things that are driving the kinds of feelings you have about money on an individual basis, how you would approach, once you know that, how to talk to somebody. And this is what you started right there with the money talk guidelines, which would be a good approach when you want to talk to someone about money issues. And then, of course, as we always say, practice, practice, practice. That makes perfect. And that's how you get into Carnegie Hall. So practice, practice, practice to improve your relationships.
That's right. So once again, if anybody wants a little refresher on money scripts, I just want to define it a little clearly because you will want to understand what those are when you're going in to talk to your partner. So when I say money scripts are things you believe about money and different topics such as happiness or budgets or work. And sometimes they're only partial truths. Mm-hmm. We've said them over and over again, or we've heard them throughout our lives growing up. And so we act as if they're true. But when we dig into them, sometimes they're only partial truths. And so understanding what those are and being able to tap into that and create the awareness will allow us to move forward. Especially, I mean, some money scripts are fine, but then there's other money scripts that may be holding you back.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, if you want, or if all of this is just sounding like a real loud kind of swooshing sound over your head, go back, listen to episode 2, and then episode 3, and the ones that continue will make a lot more sense. And Kim, I wanted to start with, the chapter 1 of her book. She talks about money taboos, and I was really struck by this one statistic. And I think that this is a good way to maybe start the program in talking about our own experience, as a young couple. But a survey was done by Fidelity Investments, and they found that 4 out of 10 people could not correctly identify their partner's salary. And 10% of those who did guess were off by $25,000 or more.
Wow.
$25,000 or more. And so making a really strong point that we're supposed to get married, have a relationship, have children, and do all these other things that are extremely intimate when it comes to a romantic relationship. And yet we don't really talk about financial matters with our partner. And you go into these relationships with it being a big mystery.
Isn't that fascinating?
It was fascinating to me.
I know. When I am doing planning, sometimes I see that look in each person's face when I'm working with the spouse, and I think he makes about that, or vice versa, and then we lay it all out there, and that's part of the process, which is so helpful for people, is just to be transparent, lay all the cards out there.
And that's an interesting part of the relationship from the standpoint that you are, I wouldn't say forcing, but you're challenging people to have conversations they may not have ever had. And some of these clients that you work with are people who've been married for a long time.
Right. It's true. And, you get into life, you get married, and maybe you don't have that many assets, and then you accumulate them as you grow together, and then you have children, and then it gets even more chaotic, and you're just paying the bills, and you're just getting by, and you don't even have time to think about, what are we going to do when the kids leave the house and we want to retire?
Well, and even before that, I mean, we talk about when you're dating, right? And then the dating becomes something a little bit more serious. Maybe you get engaged. And it's really, I think, at that point that the recommendation would be that you start having these conversations regarding money and money scripts and your feelings about money, because you don't want to find out when it's too late and it being an issue after you say, I do. And then years later, you find out, I'm a spender. You're a saver. It's not going to work out.
That's how it is, huh?
Right. Well, one point that gets made early on is the fact that money was traditionally, in its purest form, just a form of exchange, right? I've got a product or I've got a service. You want that product. You want that service. You got to pay me some money, right? And money gets exchanged. So it's really just an exchange. But it's so much more than that. It's so complicated because even though it was created for exchange of goods and services, it can mean so much more. It's a symbol. For people, it's a symbol of love, respect, self-worth, freedom, and power. And it can be used, I actually highlighted all this. It can be used to control, reward, penalize, or entice. And so it's a powerful thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not just, here's my dollar, give me a burger. No, it's much more than that. And it comes when it gets to the emotional core of the relationships you have.
And that brings back retail therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, the thought that when you buy something that you're really excited to get, you charge that car and you go, I bought this with my own money and I feel proud of that.
Right.
It can give you a high.
Right. So I think you wanted to share a story about our own, because I think in full transparency, I think one of the reasons why you and I get along so well is because we did break the silence and we broke it early. But it wasn't easy. So why don't you share with everybody, and this is where we're really peeling the onion here and getting deep, about our own money hangups or money issues initially.
I know. Well, you took me on with debt and all.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
First thing you did was pay it all off, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
It wasn't very much because we didn't have student loans, fortunately, but it was just a little bit of debt that I was carrying from some retail therapy, and we paid it off, and then we moved forward. But this brings me back to when we went to our engagement retreat, because I got to tell you, the questions that we should be asking each other and our partners have a lot to do with how we're going to live our lives together. And so having that information up front is really nice, because then there are less surprises. But if you didn't do that when you were engaged or started your relationship, there's no time like the present to get started.
Right. And I think that, when you look at the engagement retreat that we took, we were covering a number of different concepts, child, do you want a family? Do you want to live close to home? Or, whose job is going to be the lead job? There was all kinds of, complicated questions that we had to answer. But, when it came to the topic of money, it was that whole idea. Are you going to share, a checking account or a banking account? Are you going to assume each other's debts going into it? When you bring home a paycheck, if you both work, are you going to put it in the same account? Who's going to manage the day-to-day expenses? Who's going to make the investment decisions? These are all really important questions for any relationship. And the fact is people are not talking about these things. And so they go into these relationships with different viewpoints of money. And they're not wrong. Like individually, those viewpoints are not wrong. But if they don't talk about them, then that creates issues. Because if you come home and, you bought a very expensive whatever piece of furniture, and you didn't consult me, we're going to have a conversation about it, right?
Right.
But I think a lot of people may stay silent and just sit there in resentment. How could you do this? And did we need it? And, so it's a fascinating concept and just interesting how, you draw these conversations out as you start these relationships with clients.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What? Oh, here we go.
Have you ever hidden a purchase from me?
Ooh. If it is, it's small, right? Like candy or something like that. Or like sneaking off and maybe getting a burger when I, should be coming home and having a meal.
Yeah.
But it's not anything serious. But it's really interesting. I love that chapter, that portion where she talked about money deception, right? As a form of infidelity. It's almost like this financial infidelity. Yeah, there was one stat which I thought was fascinating, and it said that 80% of spouses admit to hiding purchases from each other so they don't have to justify their spending habits.
I have hidden purchases from you before.
What? Really?
When I feel guilty if I'm spending too much money on clothing or something, I sometimes use my own credit card for that, so I know you won't know how much it was.
Wait a second. Will you have your own credit card?
Yeah. So sometimes I spend my own money for things if I feel really guilty, like I shouldn't be spending this much on clothing, or if I just want to buy you a present and I don't want you to know how much it's going to be because,
okay.
You pay the credit card bill so you know what's on there. That's no fun if you know how much your gift is.
Yeah. Well, okay. But you're saying that those hidden purchases are to buy me a gift?
Well, sometimes it's to buy myself a gift too.
Oh, okay.
And I won't have to feel guilty if it's coming from my hard-earned money.
Got it. Well, I think that's okay. It's not like,
Yeah.
All right.
I know, but it's funny that even though you think it's okay and you're such a nice guy, you never give me a hard time, but there's guilt. Mm-hmm. I still have guilt. And that's just something somewhere deep down inside, I believe that I shouldn't be spending that much money on myself.
Even though you worked hard for it.
Right. I don't feel comfortable.
Do you think the cost of the item has any impact on the amount of guilt you feel? Like I admitted to the fact that if I do, it's something small. It's like it's a candy or it's a little meal or something like that. So it's not going to break the bank in doing that. It's not like going out and buying a car or a new lawnmower or a new bike or something like that. It's something small. Does that make any difference from the standpoint of whether it's big or small? It's still like that whole idea of infidelity. There's no measure of whether it's a small infidelity or a big infidelity. It's infidelity.
No, if it's going to be infidelity, it's going to be big.
Oh, man. This is a whole different podcast.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, like little stuff, I'll put it on the joint cards. But anyways, which brings up an interesting conversation as we digress, is just this whole idea of, I was raised to share everything. We put it all in one pot. We spend together and we, earn money together. And it's all one place. But sometimes I think it is kind of nice to have your own little little account or credit card that you can do these kind of things on your own and not have to feel guilty.
Right. It's interesting because it depends on where the money comes from. Like I always feel that way as it relates to money that earned, let's say, through your salary, right? Mm-hmm. The stuff that your work money. Mm-hmm. But if I go to Las Vegas and I gamble, right? Even though I'm gambling with money that was pulled from the joint account, if $100 becomes $200, in my mind, those $100, those are mine because it's my luck.
Really?
And it's because I won, right? And I'll share. I mean, we'll share. And there's been times where like I'm up and you're down and I give you some of my winnings and stuff. And that's all well and good. But in my mind, I'm thinking, I earned this, especially if I win it in poker, because that is more skill driven, from the standpoint that it's like an earning. But because it's not work, like it's not a work earning, it's more like a play earning, I feel that it's more mine.
I'm learning so much in this conversation.
And so is everybody else who's listening.
I know, right? Well, and the point is, nothing is, again, right or wrong. It's just that we should be talking about this.
Right. And so we talk about, when in looking at young couples or people who are in committed relationships, whether it's before they get married or after they get married, Kathleen actually points out two different things that I think really will help, in whether or not that couple will be successful in being able to manage through and get past, the money silence. So the first one has to do with money compatibility. And money compatibility really has to do with, I know we have, is that you have similar financial goals, short-term and long-term goals, and a shared set of values. And that you're able to discuss and resolve financial differences by being like-minded. And so I think it's really interesting from the standpoint that I think we do that. We've always really been good about sitting down and talking about our short-term goals and our long-term goals. And you mentioned it in the last podcast, this whole idea of the green light, yellow light, or red light. Do we ever have a yellow light? It's either green or red, right? So the idea being that if we're on a red, we have to be mindful of our expenses, mindful not to make an unnecessary purchase. If we're in yellow, we're kind of in that middle area. And if we're in green, it doesn't mean that it's carte blanche. You can go out and buy anything you want. But you're not concerned if we have to make a big purchase, but we usually discuss that before we do. It's not like that's. Can I digress here, because this is one of the issues I have in the holidays. Okay, I love the holidays. I love Christmas. I love New Year's. I love the end of the year, but I cannot stand. And now we're getting deep into my own money script here. I cannot stand those commercials, and they tend to be like for a high-end vehicle, like a Lexus or a Mercedes or something. Where then there's always one commercial like this at the end of the year where like the wife shows up or she's with her husband and then he like gives her the keys and she goes out to the driveway and there is parked her new Mercedes with a big bow on it. And I think, who does that? I mean, honestly, who buys a Mercedes without consulting their spouse and just surprises them? Buys an $80,000 car and just parks it in the driveway like she didn't see it with a big bow on it and gives her the keys. And then there was this one commercial this past year where not only did he buy her a truck, he bought himself a truck. And the only difference was one was black and one was red. And that just drove me nuts. It drove me nuts. I was just like, that just doesn't happen. And if it happens with a couple that I don't know.
Right. Well, you also have...
That's the end of my TED Talk.
Wow,
I'm going to get down from my soapbox.
He's standing up. He's so animated.
Yeah.
And I'm going, wow.
I did say we were going to get real.
Felt that
right?
way.
It was going to get emotional.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know where that one was coming from. But I was just thinking about that because we were talking about that couple has got to be really connected, right? They must have zero money silence. Well, I guess they're buying cars for each other without each other knowing. But obviously, when she sees the car, she's so excited that it must be okay.
It's all relative.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, who knows how much income they make, right? How much they have on the sidelines.
True. That might just be chunk change for them.
If it is, then it's all relative. So we just have to understand that everybody's situation is different. Mm-hmm. And, right. Probably more honesty and transparency is better than less. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have these money conversations.
That's true. Well, I mentioned there was two different things that really lead to the success between a couple when it comes to working with each other as it relates to financial issues. Number one was the money compatibility, which I mentioned. And so that couple must be really compatible because they both have new trucks. The second thing is financially fit. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think you come in. And I don't mean you come into the couple. I mean, this is where, as an advisor, you help out. A financially fit couple has the desire and the financial knowledge to proactively plan for their future. And so whether they do that at home on their own, or they seek the help of an advisor or a counselor, a coach, or somebody that helps them work through these things, those are the two things that come up. Compatibility, financially fit.
Well, and that's interesting because then that brings up a whole nother topic, which is, you come from different backgrounds in your family. You may have had a do-it-yourself family, or you may have hired out all your help. I know in our house, we tried to do a lot of the work, home maintenance stuff ourselves, but when things got out of control, we would hire it out, or when business was going really well, we just didn't have the time. My parents would hire it out. And so a certain level of comfort has to be there with couples too, to be able to say, if this is really important to you and you feel we need to have our plan for our future, then allow that spouse to go out there and seek help and be supportive and be there through the process, because it is really important to understand where you're going.
Well, in any sort of, if it's anything worth doing, it's probably worth paying for. If you can't do it yourself, in which case, seeking somebody to assist you in that process is important, right? Whether you need counseling from the standpoint if the marriage is suffering or you're having issues, but by the same token, if you don't understand finances, don't try to guess. Right. That's when you seek the help of a counselor. And so I was kind of curious, from your perspective, now you've been working with people for many, many years now, is how do you approach that subject? Like, how do you start talking to people? And how soon in the process do you figure out, we got a lot to work with here?
That's a good question. I think that when people come to me, couples have agreed upon the idea of seeking help. And I think once you've come together and decided to, go ahead, spend the money on an advisor, then you just want to get the most out of your advisor. And so it seems pretty easy at that point to be able to ask questions on both sides and get the answers because it's better for you. It saves time and money, right?
Mm-hmm. And what would you consider in those cases like a good outcome?
In those cases, I would consider a good outcome is when we can gather all the information. Both of them are eager to give it to me. And then it becomes a question of, one thing is just gathering data. The second is the conversation that needs to happen between partners as well is, what do you want to do when you are older?
Right.
And when you stop working, when your money can work for you, what do you want to do? And that's really interesting. This goes back to our old days when we were giving seminars and we said, would you prefer to vacation at the beach or in the mountains? Or would you prefer to live in a big city or in the rural life? All of these things have to be thought out and planned for, along with everything else. And sometimes that's the harder part to get to. Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself often talking to clients and recognizing that this is maybe the first time they've actually had some of these conversations?
It can be a lot of times, especially because I do often have a lot of clients coming to me in their 40s. Mm-hmm. And so they're still it's still far away. And so they haven't really thought of it as a reality and haven't really imagined what it will look like. And so it's kind of funny to give them the liberty to dream about their future. But that's part of what we do.
So for the folks that are at home who are not working with an advisor who want to have these conversations, how do they get started? What would you recommend be the first step?
Well, I think that, the first step is really just getting all the facts out there. But then the second step is really understanding what you value. And I always say, financial planning is a lot about making choices and make those choices based on what you value. So you and I both agree on this. We love experiences. We love to travel. Our kids love to travel. The other day we did one of those escape rooms, and that was a fun experience too. And so we spend the money on those kinds of experiences versus having a big home or, all this pretty car and all of those kind of things don't mean as much to us. And so we understand our values, and that's something that should be discussed between partners. And then from there, then you can kind of look at what you want to be doing in your future years when you no longer have to work and decide what's right for you. It's really all about choices because typically none of us can do it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I like to say every yes is a no to something else, but every no is a yes to something else.
Well, and to underscore the importance of all this, because it goes back to the core reasons why we were having this podcast in the first place, is that 50% of first marriages end in divorce. That's a pretty common, statistic. I think people kind of know that. They go into it knowing 50%, still high. However, financial conflict is often cited as the leading cause, which goes back to why this is so important.
Right. And I tell you, when I look at financial conflict, I think it's actually manifested through money. I think the problems are rooted somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Just like when we look at these money scripts and see some of the things we do with our money has a lot to do with our money scripts. And so there may be a lot of other emotions going on there, but somehow we fight with our wallets.
Right. And how much, in continuing in that thought process, how much of that is deep-rooted to how you were raised and the household that you grew up? Mm-hmm. And so in our next podcast, we're actually going to dig even deeper by looking at the relationship with money and the kids.
Right.
Right. And how much those values are passed on to the kids, and then how much the kids themselves for their own expenses, how it plays into the equation.
Right. And that's really cool.
So I'm looking forward to recording that next podcast, and maybe we'll bring the kids in on the conversation.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
It would be fun, and I think they'd enjoy it, but it'd be really interesting to get their take as well.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I look forward to that. That should be the next show coming up. I can't tell you when, because it could be sooner rather than later, but the fact is we're really excited about bringing this information to you.
Yeah, that's great. And so we will leave with a thought, and that is your personalized action plan. So one of the things I think is really important to do when you stop and think, yes, we should be having more conversations with our partners. And, if there's a whole laundry list full of things that you want to talk about, well, bring only one item to the table per night. This should be an ongoing discussion, and you'll have plenty of time to discuss everything. But just take one step at a time, figure out what you want to get out of the first conversation and move on from there. And then remember to always practice with use your money talk guidelines. Be curious, be nice, be respectful. And then, have an action plan. So what do you want to get out of this conversation? And, look at what roadblocks you might encounter along the way and how you're going to react to that. And, prepare ahead of time.
Those are all really good points, and hopefully you're all taking notes. But if you're driving, just mental notes. And if you're walking the dog, again, mental notes, I guess. But the fact is that we are looking forward to sharing some additional guidelines and how it applies to your kids, how it applies to working with aging parents, and then how it applies to your job and your career. So more to come on Breaking Money Silence, once again, based on the book by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. And it's been a pleasure kind of uncovering some of these things with you tonight, Kim. We got more to talk about after we push stop on the record. But the fact is, we really want to thank you all for listening to the show. We hope you will subscribe to the podcast on any of the media players that we're playing, including YouTube. Please share the show. Tell people about it. Share. Makes it really easy. Tell them that you heard this podcast. You're learning something. Hopefully you're learning something. Share it with your friends. And don't forget to ask questions. So you can email me, or if you're on Twitter, use hashtag AskTGF.
That's right. Hashtag AskTGF. And hopefully we'll have an answer.
That's right. So once again, I'm Victor Gaxiola.
I'm Kim Gaxiola.
And remember, what will you do when your money works for you? Thank you.
Bye.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to like the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook or follow us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Tech Girl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies.
I think I'm done.